When a father and his daughter arrive in a new town, everyone believes their story is a simple quest for a fresh start. But from the moment they step into Cedar Glen, an ominous shadow looms, and the unsettling events that unfold hint at a threat far darker than anyone could have imagined. What seemed like a mere adjustment to a quiet life unravels into a twisted tale of secrets, guilt, and an unquiet spirit that places a little girl in grave peril. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if you believe the truth should always come to light, be sure to like and subscribe for more. Henry Wilkinson felt a lump in his throat as he turned off the main highway onto a smaller road, lined with tall cedars that seemed to arch overhead like watchful sentries. The worn sign read Cedar Glen, population 4,312, though it had clearly lost a few letters over the years. His battered pickup truck rattled a little, but Lucy, his 6-year-old daughter, was too busy craning her neck to see the scenery to notice. The tension in Henry's chest mingled with a faint hope that this place, quiet, green, and tucked away from the life they'd left behind, might offer them the peace they needed. Lucy's eyes were wide with curiosity. She pressed her small hands to the window, leaving smudged prints. "Daddy, look at that big barn," she whispered, pointing at a red structure on the horizon. Henry mustered a small smile, though his heart ached. "Yeah, sweet pea, it's big," he said. He snuck a glance at her, noting how thin she looked after months of upheaval and sorrow. She had lost her mother, his wife, Eleanor, only half a year ago. A swift, brutal illness had taken her, leaving Henry reeling with grief and Lucy with endless questions. Maybe a new town, a new environment, would help them both heal. He followed the main road into Cedar Glen's small downtown. It was all quaint storefronts, old brick buildings, and planters bursting with summer flowers. The sky above was a dazzling blue. A few locals waved at the unfamiliar truck, friendly in that small-town way Henry hadn't experienced in years. He felt both comforted and unsettled, not knowing how to respond to such warmth after months of isolation. They arrived at their new home, a modest cottage on the outskirts of town, complete with a porch swing and a yard framed by towering cedar trees. The paint was a bit chipped, and the yard needed weeding, but Henry saw potential in the cozy layout, the large windows, and the sense of serenity in the surrounding woods. It would take time, but he could fix the place up. Handiwork was second nature to him. Lucy leaped out of the truck first, hugging her worn stuffed cat, Muffin, to her chest. "Daddy, is this really our new home?" she asked, eyes shining with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Henry lifted her out, giving her a gentle squeeze. "Yes, sweet pea. We'll make it nice and comfy," he said. He turned, scanning the property, trying to picture a future here for them both. He wanted Lucy to have a chance at normalcy again, though that word felt like a ghost. Their old home was filled with memories of Eleanor, her laugh, her cooking, her warmth. Every hallway was haunted by what used to be. Maybe here he and Lucy could breathe. After a few days of settling in, Lucy seemed to adapt quickly. The interior of the cottage was quaint, with a living room, a small kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a bathroom. Henry spent hours lugging boxes in, setting up Lucy's bedroom with pastel walls, little shelves for her books, and a soft rug where she could play with her dolls. Lucy appeared happy in these moments, though he caught flickers of sadness in her eyes whenever something reminded her of her mother. On the 3rd day, Henry received a phone call from an old friend, Craig, who had recommended Cedar Glen in the first place. Craig mentioned there was a daycare in town, Bright Horizons, run by a woman named Ms. Caldwell. He assured Henry it was a reputable place where Lucy could spend afternoons while Henry picked up handyman jobs around the area. Henry had been hesitant about daycare, especially after all Lucy had been through, but the financial reality gave him little choice. He needed an income, and Lucy needed socialization. So, on a warm morning in July, Henry guided Lucy's hand as they walked up the steps to Bright Horizons. The exterior was painted a cheery yellow, with a small playground off to the side, currently empty. A neat sign by the door read, "Bright Horizons, a safe, fun space for your child." Henry tried to quell the nervous flutter in his stomach. He reminded himself that Lucy needed to be around other children, to laugh and play in a way she hadn't been able to since her mother passed. Inside, The daycare smelled of crayons and disinfectant. The walls were painted in soft pastel colors, adorned with colorful posters of numbers, letters, and cartoon animals. A few children's drawings were taped up in the hallway, scrawled in vibrant markers. Lucy pressed closer to Henry's side, her eyes flitting to every corner. Henry rubbed her shoulder reassuringly. A woman in her late 50s, with silver-streaked hair pinned neatly into a bun, approached with a polite but somewhat stiff smile. "You must be Mr. Wilkinson," she said. "I'm Ms. Caldwell, director of Bright Horizons. And this must be Lucy." Lucy responded with a small nod, half hiding behind Henry's leg. "Hi," she managed, her voice barely audible. Ms. Caldwell's smile tightened ever so slightly, but her tone was soothing. "It's lovely to meet you, Lucy. We have some other children playing in the main room. Would you like to see?" Henry spoke gently, bending to Lucy's level. "Go on, sweet pea. I'll walk with you." They followed Ms. Caldwell down a short corridor into a large playroom. Toys were scattered across a soft, padded floor. Low tables were set up with coloring books, crayons, and small puzzles. A handful of children were present, ranging from toddlers to about Lucy's age. Henry spotted a small reading corner stocked with picture books, beanbag chairs, and plushies shaped like animals. Ms. Caldwell gestured around. "We keep the environment nurturing and positive. The older children sometimes work on basic letters and numbers, but mostly we focus on social skills and creative play." Henry forced a smile, trying to appear at ease. He saw Lucy eye a group of kids gathered around a table, coloring pictures of animals. One girl waved shyly at Lucy, who offered a tentative smile back. Henry felt a surge of relief. Maybe this would be good for her after all. Lucy's first day seemed to pass uneventfully. Henry returned in the late afternoon to find her quietly drawing at a table while Ms. Caldwell supervised. The other children had mostly gone home. Lucy's picture was of a house nestled among tall trees, with a smiling sun overhead. It gave Henry's heart a much-needed lift. Ms. Caldwell said Lucy had been well-behaved, if a bit reserved. She insisted with her usual polite formality that Lucy was a delightful addition to the daycare. That night, as Henry cooked a simple dinner, pasta with butter and salt, Lucy sat at the table and described her day. "Miss Caldwell told us a story about a family of rabbits," Lucy said. "But it was kinda boring. Some kids were coloring pictures of, I think it was a farm. I colored a house." She took a bite of pasta, chewing pensively. "I miss Mommy," she added softly. Henry's chest constricted. He went over and rubbed her back gently. "I miss her too," he whispered. "She'd be proud of how brave you're being." Lucy nodded, eyes shining with the threat of tears, but she didn't cry. She finished her dinner, and they spent the rest of the evening in the living room. Lucy watched a cartoon while Henry read on the couch, trying to distract himself from the sadness that seemed to lurk behind every quiet moment. Eventually, he tucked her into bed, reading a short bedtime story until she drifted off. That night, Henry dreamed of Eleanor. They were walking in a vast field under a bright sky. Eleanor turned to him, her face radiant, about to say something, but he woke before she could speak. The emptiness in his chest returned in full force, and he lay awake for hours, listening to the hush of the cedar trees outside the window. The next morning, Lucy's mood was subdued. She seemed reluctant to return to Bright Horizons but didn't complain outright. Henry chalked it up to standard first-week jitters. He guided her to the car, promising they'd do something fun over the weekend, maybe explore the local park or visit the ice cream shop he'd spotted downtown. Lucy offered a small, hopeful smile. But soon, Henry began noticing changes in Lucy. The first sign was her humming at odd hours, a soft, eerie melody that Henry couldn't place. It wasn't one of her usual childhood tunes or something from her cartoons. Late at night, he'd hear it drifting from her bedroom, a faint, almost haunting lullaby. Each time he asked Lucy about it, she shrugged, as if she wasn't aware she had been humming at all. Then, there were the moments when she seemed to whisper under her breath, as though carrying on a conversation with someone. He caught her doing this in front of the bathroom mirror one evening. When he gently asked who she was talking to, she jolted as though startled and quickly said, "No one, Daddy," before hurrying off to her room. Henry's concern deepened when, while picking Lucy up from Bright Horizons, he overheard two other parents discussing their own children's behavior. "Jackson keeps talking about some imaginary friend he has," one mother said, looking unsettled. "He says the friend is a girl who stands in the mirror and wants to play with him." The other parent shivered. "My daughter's been waking up crying about a girl who won't leave her alone. I wonder if it's just a game the kids are playing, or something they saw on TV." Henry's pulse quickened, remembering Lucy's mirror whispering. Could it be the same imaginary friend? He approached the two parents, introducing himself. They seemed reluctant to talk at first, but Henry's genuine worry elicited sympathy. "That's weird," Henry said, trying not to appear alarmed. "Lucy's been through. She's humming at night and sometimes talking to herself." The mother with Jackson frowned. "Something about that daycare feels off, I swear. But Ms. Caldwell is so respected in this town." Henry nodded, forcing an uneasy smile. They parted ways, leaving Henry grappling with dread. He took Lucy home, determined to get to the bottom of it without jumping to wild conclusions. Maybe it was all just the children's imaginations. Then again, Lucy's behavior felt more than just a passing phase. That night, Lucy crawled into Henry's bed around 2 in the morning, sobbing. She clung to him, trembling. When he asked what was wrong, she just shook her head and mumbled, "I'm scared." He held her until her sobs subsided, a storm of worry swirling in his mind. What was happening to his little girl? In the days that followed, Henry tried to coax Lucy into talking about her experiences. Sometimes, he'd catch bits of conversation that made him shiver, Lucy muttering, "No, I can't help you," or, "But I'm not allowed to go there," as though responding to instructions from an unseen voice. Other times, she'd simply stare at a corner of the room, her face pale with dread. Finally, after another restless night, Henry decided to keep Lucy home from Bright Horizons for the day. He told Miss Caldwell that Lucy wasn't feeling well, which was partially true. She was exhausted and pale. Miss Caldwell's voice seemed neutral over the phone, but Henry detected a faint note of concern, or maybe something else, that made him uneasy. He set Lucy up on the couch with blankets and cartoons, then drove to the local library. He recalled that a rumor was going around about a missing girl from the daycare's past, but no one had mentioned a name. If something had happened at Bright Horizons years ago, the library might hold old newspaper archives or records that would confirm or debunk the rumor. The Cedar Glen Library was a modest brick building near the edge of downtown. Inside, it smelled of old paper and lemon polish. Henry approached the librarian, an older woman with kind eyes, and explained he was new in town, looking up some local history. When he asked about any tragedies or incidents tied to the daycare, the librarian's expression grew guarded. "We keep old newspaper archives on microfilm," she said softly, leading him downstairs to a small, dimly lit room. She handed him a spool and gave instructions on how to load it into the viewer. "This might have something from about 15 years ago, I believe." Henry spent an hour scrolling through old articles. Most were about town fairs, local elections, new business openings. Then he found it, a short piece titled "Missing Child at Cedar Glen Daycare." The date was 14 years prior. His heart rate spiked as he read the brief account. Grace Abbott, age 6, disappeared from the daycare's premises under uncertain circumstances. A frantic search ensued, but she was never found. Police considered the possibility of abduction or that she wandered off. The article quoted the daycare director, Patricia Caldwell, saying she was devastated and had no explanation for how Grace slipped away. The case remained unsolved. Henry leaned back, the text blurring as panic and sorrow washed over him. A little girl, the same age as Lucy, vanished from Bright Horizons all those years ago. The article ended abruptly, with no follow-up, leaving Henry to guess that Grace was never located. The horrifying possibility that Lucy's behavior was connected to the spirit of this missing girl made his stomach churn. He wasn't a superstitious man, but everything about Lucy's nightly humming, the other children seeing a mysterious girl in mirrors, it all added up in a terrifying way. He skimmed further. A few more short mentions of the missing child popped up in subsequent papers. Search efforts continue, no new leads, community rallies for Abbott family. Ultimately, The story vanished from the headlines. No resolution. It was as though Grace was erased from town memory. He tried searching for the Abbott family's mention in the city directory but turned up nothing. Perhaps they had moved away, destroyed by grief. Heart pounding, Henry thanked the librarian and left. On the drive home, the warm sunshine felt at odds with the icy dread in his chest. Lucy was safe with him for now, but he couldn't ignore that something supernatural might be afoot, or, at the very least, something deeply traumatic had seeped into that daycare's walls. If Ms. Caldwell knew more than she let on, why wasn't she sharing it? Had the older townspeople grown complacent in forgetting the tragedy? Lucy was curled up on the couch when he returned, dozing in front of the TV. A half-eaten bowl of soup sat on the coffee table. Henry knelt by her side and brushed a hand through her hair. She stirred, blinking up at him. "Hey, sweet pea," Henry said softly. "How are you feeling?" Lucy rubbed her eyes. "Tired. I had a bad dream," she murmured. Henry's chest tightened. "Do you remember what it was about?" Lucy glanced toward the blank TV screen, biting her lip. "A girl was calling me. She said her name was Grace. She wanted me to go with her somewhere." She trailed off, trembling. "I was so scared." Henry felt a jolt of fear race up his spine. He forced a calm tone, even though his heart hammered. "It's okay," he whispered, gathering Lucy into a hug. "You're safe here with me." That night, Lucy slept in Henry's bed for comfort. He read her 2 bedtime stories, but she was fidgety, anxious. Around midnight, he heard her whimper in her sleep, mumbling, "Grace? Grace, I can't help." He soothed her gently until she quieted. The dread in his gut grew. He knew he had to keep searching for answers, to figure out a way to help Lucy and possibly bring peace to this missing child's restless spirit, if that was what was truly happening. Over the next few days, Henry set up a plan. He started discreetly asking around town about the daycare, about Grace Abbott, about Ms. Caldwell. Most people shut down when he brought up the missing girl. Some genuinely didn't remember, others averted their eyes as though it was a taboo subject. A few older residents gave him scraps of information: how the search parties combed the woods, how Grace's mother nearly lost her mind with grief, how Miss Caldwell was questioned but never charged. A rumor persisted that Caldwell had been neglectful or had a fierce temper. But official sources found no direct evidence linking her to the disappearance. All the while, Lucy returned to daycare sporadically. Henry felt stuck, needing income from odd jobs. He tried not to leave her too often, but some days he had no choice. Lucy grew quieter, paler, as though something gnawed at her spirit. The only times she seemed truly at peace were in the early mornings, when they shared breakfast, and in the late afternoons, before bedtime fear crept in. One afternoon, when Henry went to pick Lucy up earlier than usual, he found her sitting alone in the corner of the playroom, staring at a blank spot on the wall. Her face was tear-streaked, and the other kids played on the opposite side of the room, as if avoiding her. Miss Caldwell stood by the door, her expression pinched. "What happened?" Henry demanded gently, kneeling by Lucy. Ms. Caldwell folded her hands together. "Lucy had an incident," she said stiffly. "She claimed to see someone in the mirror during bathroom break. It frightened her. The other children became upset. I tried to calm them, but Lucy insisted it was a girl named Grace." Henry felt Lucy cling to his sleeve, her trembling obvious. He glared at Ms. Caldwell, seething with frustration. "And what did you do?" he asked, keeping his voice level for Lucy's sake. Ms. Caldwell's eyes flicked away. "I assured her there was no one else there. We even checked the bathroom." But Lucy was inconsolable. Henry gathered Lucy into his arms and stood up. "We're going home," he said. "This place clearly isn't helping her." Miss Caldwell's mouth tightened, and she took a step back. "Do what you must," she murmured. That car ride home was filled with Lucy's quiet sobs. Henry could barely keep his own emotions in check. When they arrived, he gave Lucy some water and sat her on the couch, gently brushing her hair with his hand. "Can you tell me what you saw, honey?" he asked softly. Lucy sniffled. "I saw a girl in the mirror behind me. Her hair was wet. She looked so sad. She asked me to help her." Lucy's voice quavered. "She said she was alone and couldn't leave. Henry's heart twisted. It's okay. You're safe now. Lucy looked at him with wide eyes. But, Daddy, she feels real. I swear I can see her sometimes at the edge of my vision. I'm scared. He hugged her tightly. I know. We'll figure this out. Deep inside, Henry was grappling with a flood of emotions: anger at Ms. Caldwell, sorrow for Lucy, confusion about what exactly was haunting them. His rational mind wanted a logical explanation: childhood trauma, a fear response to losing her mother, suggestion from other kids. But in his gut, he believed Lucy's experiences had a supernatural undertone. Determined to act, Henry visited a local historical enthusiast named Dolores who ran a small museum out of her converted garage. She was in her 70s, with a quick wit and an encyclopedic knowledge of Cedar Glen's past. Her eyebrows rose when Henry mentioned Grace Abbott. Yes, I recall that name, Dolores said, rummaging through a filing cabinet brimming with old photos, postcards, and newspaper clippings. Poor child vanished from that daycare. People whispered about Ms. Caldwell, but nothing was proven. It's like the whole town wanted to forget. She handed Henry a photocopy of an old black and white photo, a group of children outside the daycare. That's from around 15 years ago, maybe. Grace is in there somewhere, though it's not labeled. Henry's gaze flicked over the children's faces. One small girl with braided pigtails and large, solemn eyes caught his attention. She stood a bit apart from the group, as though shy. He couldn't help but imagine Lucy in that photo, feeling vulnerable and alone. Dolores pursed her lips. Rumor had it that Ms. Caldwell was never quite the same after that incident. She changed the name of the daycare, repainted everything. Some folks said they heard children's voices echoing when the place was empty, but you know how rumors go. Cedar Glen's an old town with old stories. Henry nodded, heart heavy. I want to help Grace, if that's what's happening, he confessed quietly. I can't keep ignoring Lucy's distress. Dolores gave him a long, searching look. I believe in spirits, you know, she said softly. I've felt them before. If you truly think this child's spirit is clinging to Lucy, you may need to confront the place where it all happened, and the person who was there. Henry drove home, the weight of Dolores's words heavy on his mind. That night he spent hours researching child psychology, ghost stories, spiritual cleansing, anything that might offer a clue on how to free Lucy from this torment. He was out of his depth, but he refused to give up. If Grace was indeed reaching out from beyond, the solution might involve acknowledging her suffering, giving her a voice. As the next couple of weeks dragged on, Lucy's possessions, or episodes, intensified. She began speaking in an eerie, hushed tone, sometimes using phrases Henry had never heard her use before. Once, Henry found her at the kitchen table, drawing a detailed scene of the daycare's hallway, complete with a figure that looked suspiciously like Miss Caldwell's rigid posture. Another time, Lucy murmured about a creek near the daycare, where the water took me away. Henry questioned Ms. Caldwell about any nearby creek, but she claimed ignorance, then changed the subject. Henry grew convinced Ms. Caldwell was lying or withholding crucial information. One late afternoon, while Lucy napped, he marched to Bright Horizons, wanting to catch Ms. Caldwell alone. He found her in the small office, sorting through paperwork. She looked up, startled by his sudden appearance, and frowned. "Mr. Wilkinson, we're closed for the day," Ms. Caldwell said in that practiced, polite tone. Henry shut the office door behind him, heart pounding. "We need to talk about Grace Abbott," he said. Her lips compressed. "That was a terrible tragedy. But it happened many years ago, and I fail to see how it concerns you." Henry stepped forward, fists clenched at his sides. "It concerns me because my daughter is seeing Grace. She's terrified and it's destroying her. I believe Grace's spirit is trapped here, Ms. Caldwell. Don't you feel any remorse for your part in what happened?" Miss Caldwell's eyes flickered with something like fear. "My part?" she repeated, voice tight. "I had no part in her disappearance. I told the police everything I knew." "That's not what I've heard," Henry retorted. "People say you were the last one to see her. They suspect you neglected to watch her, or worse, that you argued with her. She ran, and you never bothered to chase her until it was too late." Her face paled. "I won't stand for these accusations," she snapped. Now, please leave or I'll call the police. Henry glared at her, chest burning with anger and frustration. Fine, he said. But this isn't over. My daughter's life is at stake. He left the daycare trembling with rage. Miss Caldwell's reaction only confirmed his suspicion that she knew more. But how to make her talk? Lucy's nightmares couldn't go on forever. He worried that if Grace's spirit truly wanted Lucy to go with her, it could lead to something dire. Returning home, Henry found Lucy in the living room, pale and shaky. She stared at him with wide eyes. "Daddy," she whispered, "Grace wants me to meet her at the daycare. She said that's where she's trapped." Henry swallowed hard, gently kneeling beside her. "You don't have to go anywhere," he murmured. "You're safe with me." Lucy shook her head. "I'm scared, Daddy. She's so angry. She says the adults lied, and she can't leave until someone tells the truth. She thinks I can help her." Lucy looked at Henry with tears in her eyes. "What should I do?" Henry gathered Lucy into a tight hug, cursing himself for feeling so powerless. He recalled Dolores's words. Maybe the only way to free Grace was to confront the truth of what happened. Ms. Caldwell had refused to share, but there had to be someone else who knew, or some evidence left behind. He decided to track down anyone who worked at the daycare back then, or any old staff members who might be willing to talk. With some calling around, thanks to a few townsfolk sympathetic to Lucy's plight, Henry managed to find a woman named Sandra who'd been an assistant teacher many years ago at the daycare, though she left shortly after Grace's disappearance. She was reluctant to meet, but Henry's desperation won her over. They sat down at a local diner one morning, Lucy safely in the care of a neighbor. Sandra was in her late 40s, her face lined with worry as she sipped her coffee. "I remember Grace," she said softly, fiddling with the napkin dispenser. "She was a sweet child, quiet, always drawing pictures in a little notebook." Henry leaned forward anxiously. "What do you think happened that day? Why did she disappear?" Sandra's eyes darted around, as though she feared someone might overhear. "I don't have proof," she murmured, but Miss Caldwell was having a lot of stress at the time. Financial troubles. She was worried the daycare would shut down. I remember hearing her raise her voice at Grace that afternoon. Grace was sobbing. Then Ms. Caldwell sent everyone outside for playtime except Grace. Later, we couldn't find her. Ms. Caldwell claimed Grace must have slipped away during recess. But I swear I saw them go into the staff office. Henry felt his stomach twist. "So you think Miss Caldwell did something to Grace?" Sandra stared at her coffee. "I can't say for sure. Maybe Grace ran away. But Ms. Caldwell acted so strange, refusing to answer questions. After that, the place rebranded, and the rumor died down. I quit soon after. I couldn't stand the atmosphere. I felt haunted." Henry swallowed, his pulse racing. "Thank you," he whispered. "This helps." Sandra offered a sad smile. "I hope you can find peace for that girl and for your daughter. I still have nightmares sometimes." After parting ways, Henry wrestled with a maelstrom of emotions. If Ms. Caldwell had locked Grace in the staff office, or scolded her harshly, Grace might have fled the building somehow and gotten lost, or worse. No wonder her spirit raged with betrayal. For Henry, the path was clear. He had to confront Ms. Caldwell again, but this time, armed with more knowledge. But before he could make that move, Lucy's condition worsened dramatically. One evening, he found her standing in the hallway, her back to him, arms limp at her sides. She was humming that dreadful lullaby again. The lights flickered, sending chills down Henry's spine. "Lucy?" he said softly, approaching. She turned slowly and Henry's breath caught. Her eyes looked glazed, distant, as though someone else stared out from inside her body. When she spoke, it was in a hollow monotone. "They lied to me. They said they'd help me, but they let me vanish." Henry's knees felt weak. "Lucy, Eddie," he said, voice trembling. She took a step closer, and he saw tears welling in her empty gaze. "He never came to save me," she whispered. "I was alone in the dark." "Grace," Henry managed, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what happened to you. Please let Lucy go." Lucy's face contorted in anguish, her voice echoing with a strange duality. "She doesn't belong here. This place is mine." Henry reached out, gently placing a hand on Lucy's shoulder. "Grace, I promise I'll bring the truth to light. You won't be forgotten. But please, let my daughter go." For a moment, Lucy's body shuddered. Then she collapsed against Henry with a small sob. He held her tightly, tears streaming down his cheeks, cradling her trembling form. He felt a cold, residual presence fade, as if letting go for the moment. Lucy stirred, blinking in confusion. "Daddy?" she whimpered. "What's happening to me?" Henry pressed his lips to her hair, fighting back sobs. "It's okay," he whispered. "I won't let anything hurt you. We'll fix this." Realizing the severity of the situation, Henry called a local detective named Sharon Mills, whom he had heard was on the force when Grace disappeared. Detective Mills agreed to meet him at a coffee shop. She was in her 40s, with sharp eyes and a determined set to her jaw. Over a cup of tea, Henry told her everything: Lucy's visions, the missing girl, Miss Caldwell's suspicious behavior. Detective Mills listened intently, occasionally scribbling notes. "I do remember that case," she said eventually. "I was just starting out. We investigated Miss Caldwell, but she had a decent alibi. Other staff members vouched for her, said she was in the hallway when Grace went missing. No sign of forced entry or abduction. The case went cold." Henry leaned forward. "What if Miss Caldwell threatened the staff? Sandra told me she saw Caldwell and Grace together." Mills frowned. "We never had enough to charge her. If you have new evidence, though, I could reopen the investigation, talk to the old staff. But to be honest, all these years later, I'm not sure what we'll find." Henry rubbed his temples, exhaustion weighing on him. "I don't even know if the legal route is how to end this. If Grace is truly haunting the daycare, she needs closure or justice of some kind." Mills studied him carefully. "I'm not a believer in ghosts, but I do believe in justice. If Ms. Caldwell was negligent, I'd like to see her held accountable. But we need hard facts." Henry thanked her and left, uncertain how to proceed. Lucy's possession was clearly escalating. He feared for her life, worried that Grace's spirit, in its anger and desperation, might harm Lucy or drag her into some fatal situation. He began sleeping in Lucy's room, reading stories until she dozed off, then staying awake as though standing guard against an unseen threat. A few nights later, Lucy awoke, screaming. Henry jolted up, flipping on the bedside lamp. She was thrashing, her eyes wild. He held her, heart pounding. "Grace is so angry," Lucy sobbed. "She wants me to come to the daycare tonight. She said she'll keep haunting me until I go." Henry felt a cold sweat bead on his skin. His mind raced. Maybe this was the confrontation that needed to happen. It felt reckless, yet he saw no other option. If confronting Ms. Caldwell in the daylight had yielded no results, maybe going to the daycare after hours with Lucy, or with Lucy's connection to Grace, could bring some resolution. He hated the idea of risking Lucy's safety, but Grace's hold was relentless. Lucy couldn't keep living like this. Steeling himself, Henry made a decision. He called Detective Mills and explained he planned to enter Bright Horizons after hours to gather any evidence and perhaps coax Grace's spirit toward peace. Mills was skeptical but concerned enough to offer backup at a distance if needed. Henry didn't mention he planned on bringing Lucy. He feared Mills wouldn't allow it. But Lucy seemed to be the key to Grace. That night, around 10 o'clock, Henry quietly slipped from the cottage with Lucy holding his hand, her stuffed cat tucked under her arm. She was trembling, but determination lit her face. The moon illuminated Cedar Glen's empty streets as they drove to the daycare. Henry parked a short distance away and cut the engine. The building was dark, only a faint glow from a streetlight casting eerie shadows. Lucy clung to Henry as they crept around to the side door he had noticed earlier. "Are we really doing this?" Lucy whispered, her small voice quaking. Henry squeezed her hand. "Yes, sweet pea. We need to help Grace and help you," he said, though his heart hammered with fear. He tested the door, which was locked as expected. But Henry had brought tools. He hated the thought of breaking in, but the situation felt dire. With a shaky hand he managed to jimmy the lock. It clicked open with unsettling ease, and they stepped inside. The hallway was dim, lit only by emergency exit signs casting a red glow. "Daddy, I'm scared," Lucy whispered. Henry's voice trembled too. "I know. Just stay close to me." They moved down the hallway, the sound of their footsteps strangely muffled by the linoleum. Child-sized chairs and tables loomed in the darkness, shapes that felt surreal and menacing at this late hour. Lucy clutched Henry's hand, and he thought he felt a faint chill in the air, as though the building was breathing cold. Suddenly, Lucy stopped short. "She's here," she breathed, eyes wide. Henry's stomach lurched. "Grace?" he asked softly. Lucy nodded, tears forming. "She wants me in that room," she said, pointing toward Ms. Caldwell's office at the far end of the corridor. Henry recalled what Sandra mentioned about seeing Grace and Ms. Caldwell enter that office. Summoning courage, he led Lucy forward. Halfway there, the overhead lights flickered on with a buzz, startling them. Lucy gasped. Then Henry heard a shuffling sound from behind. He whirled to see Ms. Caldwell standing at the other end of the hallway, face twisted with fury and fear. "What are you doing here?" Ms. Caldwell hissed, her voice echoing. "You're trespassing." Henry held Lucy protectively, heart hammering. "We need answers," he said. "Lucy can't sleep. Grace won't let her. We know you were involved with Grace's disappearance, maybe not directly, but your negligence caused this." Ms. Caldwell paled, her lips pressed in a thin line. "I told you I did nothing." Lucy suddenly let out a gasp, her body stiffening. She turned to Ms. Caldwell, her eyes glassy again, that strange echo in her voice. "You left me," Lucy said, but it wasn't Lucy's voice. It was higher, trembling, resonating with old sorrow. "You promised to take care of us, but you let me vanish." Miss Caldwell's eyes widened, and she stumbled back as though struck. No, I didn't mean." She pressed herself against the wall, trembling. Henry braced Lucy as her small frame shook. "Please, Grace, let Lucy go," he begged. But Lucy took a step forward, her face contorted with anguish. "You made me stay in your office," she said, that eerie layered voice sending chills through Henry. "You yelled. You said I was telling secrets I shouldn't. You scared me. I ran away, and you didn't stop me. You didn't even look for me until it was too late." Tears streamed down Ms. Caldwell's cheeks. I was under so much pressure," she sobbed. "I feared losing everything. Grace overheard me talking about forging documents for funding. She threatened to tell her mom. I lost my temper." Her words tumbled out in a frantic confession. "I left her alone in the office. When I came back, she was gone. I searched, but I was afraid to admit I'd locked her inside. I thought she might have gone out the window." She sank to her knees, wailing. "I lied, said I stepped out for a moment. But I swear I didn't hurt her." Henry's throat tightened with shock and anger. He glanced at Lucy, whose body trembled with the force of Grace's presence. "Grace," he said gently, "you hear that? She admits her wrongs. She's sorry." The lights flickered again, the entire building seeming to groan. Lucy's voice rose in fury and despair. "I fell by the creek," she choked out. "I thought someone would find me. But nobody came. I was alone, so cold." Ms. Caldwell sobbed wretchedly. Henry's own eyes filled with tears. He took a trembling step toward Lucy, ignoring Ms. Caldwell. Gently he reached out, cupping Lucy's face. "Grace," he murmured, tears sliding down his cheeks, "I'm so sorry you were left alone. You deserved better. We're here now. Please, let Lucy go, and we'll make sure everyone knows the truth. You won't be forgotten." Lucy's eyes, brimming with tears, fluttered shut. Her small hands shook at her sides. "Daddy," she whimpered, sounding like herself again, before her expression twisted once more as Grace's presence surged. The overhead lights flickered wildly, buzzing. A wind seemed to gust through the hallway, rustling papers, slamming a door. Ms. Caldwell screamed, cowering by the wall. Henry stood firm, cradling Lucy's head, whispering soothing words. "Grace, you're not alone anymore," he said. "Your family deserves closure. We'll give it to them, but you need to release Lucy." For a heart-stopping moment, Lucy's entire body seized, eyes rolling back. Henry cried out her name, adrenaline surging through him. Then, with a final shuddering gasp, Lucy went limp in his arms, the overhead lights stabilizing. The wind died down, replaced by a thick stillness. Henry sank to his knees, holding Lucy close. "Lucy," he whispered, heart pounding, terrified she was gone. "Sweet pea, talk to me." After a moment, Lucy stirred, her eyelids fluttering. "Daddy?" she croaked, voice her own again. She blinked in confusion, looking around. "What, where?" Relief swamped Henry, and he held her tight against his chest, tears streaming. "You're okay, Lucy. You're safe." A ragged sob from across the hallway drew Henry's attention. Ms. Caldwell remained huddled on the floor, trembling. Her hair had come undone, and her eyes were distant, as though she couldn't believe what she had witnessed. Slowly, Henry rose, still cradling Lucy in his arms. "You need to turn yourself in," Henry said grimly. "You locked Grace in your office, then lied to everyone. Your negligence cost that child her life. You let an innocent girl wander off alone because you were scared she'd reveal your fraud." Miss Caldwell's head bowed, tears dripping onto the linoleum. "I know," she rasped. "I'll confess. I can't live with this anymore." Henry nodded, exhaustion and sorrow mixing into a heavy weight in his chest. He guided Lucy toward the exit, glancing back at Ms. Caldwell one last time. "We're calling the police," he said quietly. "Stay here if you want to do the right thing." Ms. Caldwell closed her eyes, nodding as if resigned to her fate. Outside, the night air was sharp and refreshing. Lucy clutched Henry's jacket, and he could feel her heart racing. The distant glow of Detective Mills's car headlights emerged at the corner, and Henry breathed a shaky sigh of relief. He flagged her down. Mills got out, eyes wide at the sight of Lucy's tear-streaked face and Henry's shaken expression. "We got a confession," Henry managed, voice hoarse. Ms. Caldwell admitted she locked Grace in her office. Grace ran away, fell in the creek. She never told anyone, just let it get buried. Mills's brow creased. "And your daughter?" Henry looked down at Lucy, whose gaze was clearer than it had been in weeks. "She's free," he whispered, tears falling again. "First, let her go." Detective Mills stayed with Ms. Caldwell while Henry took Lucy home, but not before Mills assured him that Ms. Caldwell would be charged with negligence and obstruction of justice at the very least. The legal intricacies would take time, but at least the truth would come to light. The following days were a blur of police statements and hushed apologies from Ms. Caldwell. The community buzzed with shock, some outraged that Caldwell had hidden such a grave sin, others sorrowful to learn of Grace's lonely end. A search team scoured the creek area again, hoping to find remains, though it had been so many years that it felt unlikely. Still, the town finally acknowledged Grace's tragedy in a public, official way, which Henry believed might help Grace's spirit rest. Lucy improved almost immediately. The dark circles under her eyes began to fade, and she slept through the night without humming or whispering to unseen entities. Sometimes she'd ask Henry if Grace was all right now. He'd hold her close and say, "I think so, sweet pea. I think Grace knows we care about her." A memorial was arranged, spearheaded by Detective Mills. It took place outside the daycare, now closed indefinitely, and the entire town gathered. A small plaque honoring Grace Abbott was unveiled, bearing her name, age, and a simple line, "In loving memory of a child who deserved better." Lucy placed a bouquet of wildflowers at the base of the plaque. Henry stood behind her, hands on her shoulders, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face and a sense of bittersweet closure. As Ms. Caldwell was led away by the authorities that morning, Henry caught her eye. Her face was gaunt, etched with regret. He felt no triumph in seeing her fall from grace, only sadness that she had created this nightmare out of fear and selfishness. If she'd done the right thing years ago, Grace might not have perished alone in the creek. News spread beyond Cedar Glen, though it didn't become a massive story, just a small-town tragedy belatedly brought to justice. Henry was satisfied simply knowing Lucy was free from the haunting, and that Grace's name would not be forgotten. He found that the heartbreak he once carried over Eleanor's death had transformed into a stronger compassion, a deeper resolve to protect his daughter at all costs, and a willingness to face the darkest of truths if it meant saving an innocent life, living or otherwise. Lucy began to laugh again, a bright, unburdened sound that filled the cottage with hope. She returned to her coloring books and bedtime stories, no longer waking in the dead of night. Henry found small handyman jobs in Cedar Glen, building a network of friendly faces. Neighbors would stop by with pies or ask him to fix a fence, often thanking him quietly for what he did for that poor child. Henry always brushed it off, insisting it was Lucy who truly saved Grace by giving her a voice. Still, there were moments, especially late at night, when Henry felt a gentle presence near Lucy's room, like a soft breeze or a fleeting shadow. He wondered if Grace lingered, just for a little while, to watch Lucy experience the life she never got to have. One evening, Lucy came to him with a drawing of two girls holding hands. One had Lucy's brown hair, the other had pigtails and a gentle smile. "It's me and Grace," Lucy explained. "I hope she's happy now." Henry nodded, tears prickling his eyes. "I think she is, sweet pea." The months rolled on. Cedar Glen settled back into its small-town routine, but the daycare building remained locked and empty, a reminder of the pain hidden behind pastel walls. Lucy thrived in the local elementary school, making new friends her age. Henry saw an openness in her that he treasured. She would sometimes talk about her mom, about Grace, about how much she loved her new teacher. She was healing, day by day. Henry, too, found a measure of healing. The memory of Eleanor still clung to him. He would never stop missing her, but in choosing to save Lucy from Grace's haunting, he also learned to confront his own grief head-on. His willingness to stand up for the truth, to face horrors beyond reason, had forged in him a deeper sense of purpose. A few townspeople, including Detective Mills, proposed a small ceremony near the creek to finally lay a marker for Grace, just in case her remains still rested there. Henry, Lucy, and even Dolores from the local museum attended. They placed daisies by the water's edge, and Lucy whispered a prayer under her breath. Henry stood behind his daughter, gazing at the rippling water, imagining a bright little girl once lost and afraid. Now, perhaps, she was free. When the group left, Henry lingered a moment longer, Lucy clinging to his side. A hush fell over the trees, a peaceful stillness Henry hadn't felt in ages. He bowed his head, quietly promising Grace that she would never be forgotten again. Back at home, Lucy curled up on the couch, a content smile on her face. Henry joined her, pulling her into a gentle hug. She looked up at him, eyes bright. "Daddy, can we have a picnic next weekend? At the park? I could bring Muffin and we could invite my friend Rosie." Henry grinned, ruffling her hair. "That sounds perfect." The nightmares were over. The emptiness that had once haunted their hearts was replaced by a sense of hope and possibility. Cedar Glen was no longer a place of dread, but a small haven where Henry and Lucy could build a new life, one touched by sorrow, yes, but also by courage and love. A week later, as Henry was finishing a fix-it job at a neighbor's house, Lucy ran up with a letter in her hand. "Daddy, look," she said excitedly. It was from a lawyer's office representing the Abbott family. They had reached out after reading about the case's closure and wanted to thank Henry for revealing the truth. Grace's parents had been living a few states away, never knowing what truly happened, forced to endure the mystery all those years. Now they had some measure of closure. Henry felt tears prick his eyes again. He hugged Lucy tight. "We did the right thing," he said softly, thinking of the day they'd broken into bright horizons in desperation. A risky move, but without it, Miss Caldwell might never have confessed. Grace's parents might never have learned the final piece of the puzzle, allowing them to grieve properly. In the following months, Miss Caldwell's trial was a subdued affair. There was enough evidence for negligence, and her confession sealed her fate legally. The judge passed sentence. While the specifics weren't dramatic, it ensured Ms. Caldwell would never work with children again. Henry didn't attend every hearing, but he provided what testimony he could. Lucy was spared from speaking in court. Everyone agreed she'd been through enough. In the end, Ms. Caldwell disappeared from public view, her daycare permanently closed, its walls left to gather dust. A new caretaker bought the property with plans to convert it into a simple community center, somewhere kids could still gather, but with a new name, a new atmosphere, cleansed of its haunted past. Henry prayed it would flourish, that no shadows of old tragedies would linger in the remodeled rooms. Cedar Glen deserved that fresh start, just as Lucy did. Through it all, Henry found himself building a stronger bond with his daughter than ever before. Each day they spent, from her bedtime story requests to her excited runs home from school, felt like a blessing. He marveled at how Lucy had survived such unimaginable fear, guided Grace to the truth, and emerged with a bright spirit intact. She was, in many ways, more resilient than any grown-up Henry had ever known. One breezy Saturday, father and daughter strolled along a local hiking trail, which wound through towering cedar trees. Lucy bounded ahead, giggling when squirrels skittered by. Henry followed, smiling at her energy. A hush fell when they reached a small clearing, dappled with sunlight filtering through branches. Lucy spun around, her ponytail swinging. "Daddy, do you think Grace ever sees us?" she asked suddenly, her childish curiosity shining in her eyes. Henry considered the question, heart swelling. "I like to think she's in a better place," he answered. "And if she does see us, I hope she's smiling, knowing we remember her." Lucy nodded thoughtfully, then extended her hand to him. He took it and they walked on, listening to the hush of leaves in the wind. It was a small, tender moment, one that spoke of both the sorrow they'd been through and the hope they carried forward. Over time, Henry even opened up about Eleanor more freely, telling Lucy stories of her mother's sense of humor, her favorite songs, her gift for brightening a room with her laughter. Lucy, though she still missed her mom, didn't cry as often. She seemed at peace, content to know that while life sometimes held unthinkable tragedy, it also offered second chances and unwavering love. By the time spring arrived, the local rumor mill about the daycare and Grace's spirit died down, overshadowed by fresh gossip, new construction projects, local fairs, births and birthdays. Cedar Glen moved on, as small towns do, weaving the tragedy into its tapestry of memory. For Henry and Lucy, though, the memories of that ghostly encounter remained an intimate part of their bond. Every so often, Lucy would leave a small flower or a drawing at Grace's memorial plaque, a quiet testament that her spirit would never be forgotten. One warm evening, Henry sat on the porch swing, a glass of lemonade in hand, watching Lucy chase fireflies in the yard. The hum of cicadas filled the dusk air. He felt a calm settle in his chest that he hadn't felt since Eleanor's passing. As Lucy gleefully caught a firefly in a jar, then set it free, Henry thought of how fleeting life could be, how precious each moment was. He recalled the harrowing nights when Lucy seemed lost to the darkness, possessed by another child's desperate spirit. And now, here she was, laughing at the dance of tiny lights. He closed his eyes, murmuring a soft "thank you" to whatever cosmic force governed life and death, hoping Grace truly had found peace. Sometimes, late at night, he still felt the faint sense of a presence, but it was never malevolent. It felt more like a gentle watchfulness, as if Grace had chosen to stand guard over the family that acknowledged her pain and set her free. The notion might have been purely sentimental, but it comforted Henry nonetheless. Eventually, Lucy climbed onto the swing beside him, out of breath, face flushed from running in the humid evening. "Daddy," she said, nudging his arm, "can we roast marshmallows?" Henry ruffled her hair. "Why not?" he replied, leading her back into the cottage to grab a small bag of marshmallows and some skewers. They lit a modest fire in the backyard's old fire pit, soon toasting gooey treats under the starry sky. Lucy giggled each time a marshmallow caught flame, and Henry pretended to scold the flames before blowing them out. The sweetness of the moment balanced all the bitterness they had endured. When Lucy was sufficiently sticky-faced and tired, Henry tucked her into bed. She gave him a sticky kiss on the cheek and then snuggled under the blankets. He flicked off the lights, stepping into the hallway. For a moment he paused, recalling all the times Lucy had stood there, humming that eerie lullaby, or whispering to Grace. Now there was only peace. He visited the living room, tidied up a bit, and sank onto the couch with a satisfied sigh. In the silence, he reflected on how everything had changed, and how it all began with Lucy's strange behavior at the daycare. The memory sent a ripple of gratitude through him, that they had been brave enough to face the darkness, and that he had found the strength, for Lucy's sake, to do what needed to be done. A gentle knock sounded at the door. Puzzled, Henry stood and opened it, finding Detective Mills on the porch, arms folded. "Sorry for coming by late," she said. "Wanted to let you know Miss Caldwell's sentencing hearing wrapped up. She's facing jail time for falsifying records, plus a negligence charge. It won't bring Grace back, but it's something." Henry exhaled, nodding. "Thank you," he said softly. "I appreciate you letting me know." Mills offered a faint smile. "Figured you might want closure. Hope Lucy's doing better." "She is," Henry replied. "And I think Grace would be at peace knowing the truth came out." Mills nodded, then turned to go. "Good night," she called gently, and Henry closed the door. Relief mingled with sorrow. It was truly over. He returned to the couch, gazing out the window. In the yard, fireflies still blinked, tiny lanterns dancing in the night. A hush blanketed Cedar Glen, as if the town itself breathed easier without the weight of a child's unspoken fate. Henry felt a stirring of pride. He might not have changed the world, but he had changed Lucy's world, and maybe the spirit of Grace Abbott's too. The summer days gave way to autumn, leaves turning gold and red. Lucy started first grade at the local elementary, her backpack bouncing on her shoulders as she hopped onto the school bus each morning. Henry's handyman work continued to flourish. He repaired roofs, built fences, and sometimes used a portion of his earnings to donate to local children's charities in Grace's memory. He told no one about that last detail. He simply wanted some good to come from the heartbreak that once shook them. On weekends, Lucy often tugged at Henry's hand, leading him to Grace's memorial plaque by the old daycare. The building remained closed, awaiting renovations. Weeds sprouted by the entrance, but Lucy would carefully place a fresh daisy or a small drawing by the plaque. Sometimes she'd speak softly as though talking to a friend. Henry would stand back, letting her have that moment. He suspected Lucy would never forget Grace's influence on her life, nor would Henry himself. In a strange way, Grace had brought father and daughter closer, forging a bond tempered by shared fear and ultimate triumph. One crisp afternoon, Lucy invited a friend from school to walk with them to the memorial. The friend, Rosie, carried a pink balloon. When they reached the plaque, Rosie asked curiously about Grace. Lucy explained it was a memorial for a little girl who went missing a long time ago. Rosie listened with solemn respect. Then, the two girls let the balloon go, watching it drift into the autumn sky. Henry stood behind them, tears in his eyes, grateful that Lucy had chosen to share Grace's story, ensuring it would never vanish again. At last, the final notes of sorrow faded, replaced by a quiet acceptance. Ms. Caldwell's name occasionally surfaced in local conversation, but more often than not, people preferred to focus on the new future for that property. Rumor had it a youth rec center might open there by next year. Henry sometimes offered to help with the renovation if the new owners needed a handyman. He was determined to see the space reclaimed for something positive, a place that could bring joy rather than tragedy. When winter fell over Cedar Glen, Henry and Lucy sat by the fireplace in their cottage, sipping hot cocoa. Snow drifted lazily outside, coating the cedars in white. Lucy told Henry about her day at school. Her teacher had asked everyone to name something they were grateful for. Lucy said she was grateful for her dad. Henry's heart stuttered at her innocent sincerity. He ruffled her hair gently. "I'm grateful for you too, sweet pea," he said. "We've been through a lot, huh?" Lucy nodded, blowing on her cocoa. "But we're okay now," she said in that simple, certain way children sometimes have. Henry smiled, warmth flooding him. "Yes, we are." The flickering fire illuminated Lucy's content face, and for a second, Henry swore he saw a flicker of movement in the corner of his vision, as though someone was peeking in through the window. He turned his head, but there was nothing, just a swirl of snow against the glass. He felt no fear. Instead, he felt comfort, imagining Grace might be there, checking on them one last time. Time flowed onward. As the year closed, Cedar Glen's main street glowed with holiday lights. Lucy joined the school choir, singing cheerfully in a small pageant. Henry, seated in the front row, watched with a proud tear in his eye. Another father might have kept a stoic face, but Henry had learned life was too short not to feel deeply. Next to him, a friend from town, Marianne, whose child also sang in the choir, gently squeezed his arm as if to say, "Look how far you've come." Indeed, as Lucy's clear voice soared in song, Henry reflected on their journey, from the day they arrived in Cedar Glen, burdened by grief, to the day Lucy began seeing Grace's spirit, to that terrifying night confrontation at Bright Horizons, and finally, to the peaceful days after Miss Caldwell's confession. There was no forgetting the horrors, but there was acceptance now, and a gentle promise of tomorrow. After the concert, Henry treated Lucy to hot chocolate at a local cafe. She sat at a small table, glowing with the excitement of having performed in front of the entire school. Henry joined her, stirring his drink. "I wish Mommy could have heard me sing," Lucy said softly, looking at the steam rising from her cup. Henry's voice caught. "I bet she did," he whispered, giving Lucy's hand a gentle squeeze. "She'd be so proud." Lucy nodded, tears shimmering in her eyes. She gave a wobbly smile. "Daddy, I'm glad you never gave up when Grace was in my head." Henry wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "I would walk through fire to keep you safe," he said simply. "No matter what." In that moment, the cafe lights felt warmer, the hush of snowfall outside more serene. Henry realized that while life could hold unspeakable darkness, it also offered redemption, connection, and unbreakable love. He silently thanked Grace for teaching them that lesson, albeit through tragedy. Maybe the best they could do now was live fully and kindly, honoring Grace's memory every day they had left. When spring arrived again, the rec center renovations at the old daycare began in earnest. Henry volunteered on weekends, hauling debris, painting walls, offering his woodworking skills. Lucy sometimes tagged along, playing outside with her friends. The new owners planned to keep a small corner of the building as a memorial nook for Grace, a place where children could learn about the importance of honesty, care, and speaking up for those who can't speak for themselves. It was a small but heartfelt tribute. On the day they knocked down one of the old interior walls, Henry found Miss Caldwell's former office. Standing in the gutted space, memory washed over him, Lucy possessed by Grace's sorrow, Miss Caldwell's tearful confession. He bowed his head, taking a moment of silence. Then, with steady resolve, he helped tear down the last remains of that haunted place, letting in the fresh air of renewal. Lucy, watching from a safe distance, waved at him. Her presence, bright and hopeful, anchored him. He waved back, feeling a quiet surge of pride and relief. And so, life in Cedar Glen bloomed once more. The swirl of ghosts receded into history, replaced by the laughter of children who would soon enjoy a new community space. Henry and Lucy's bond grew day by day. Breakfasts filled with silly jokes, evenings spent reading under a comfy blanket, weekends exploring the creek now free of its dark secret. On a mild summer evening, father and daughter strolled along the quiet street together. Lucy pointed out a cluster of fireflies blinking in the bushes. Henry thought back to that first drive into town, how he had prayed Cedar Glen would be a refuge from grief. Instead, it had proven a crucible, testing their courage, forcing them to confront a decades-old mystery, and forging them into something stronger. He knelt next to Lucy, showing her how to gently cup a firefly in her hands without harming it. She marveled at the tiny glow in her palms, then released it into the evening air. Its light pulsed a few times before vanishing into the darkness. "Goodbye, little light," Lucy said, standing up. Henry ruffled her hair, a sense of contentment flooding him. "You ready to head back?" he asked. "We can make some s'mores if you want." Lucy beamed. "Yes, please." They headed toward home, side by side. Henry had learned that the line between tragedy and hope was sometimes thin, that love could bridge even the scariest gaps, and that truth, though painful, ultimately set free both the living and the dead. Cedar Glen, once overshadowed by a missing child's unanswered cries, now stood as proof that the truth could still be found, even after years of silence. In time, Henry even started thinking about new possibilities, making friends, maybe dating again someday, though he couldn't imagine loving anyone the way he loved Eleanor. But for now, it was enough to be Lucy's dad, to watch her flourish and grow in a place they'd helped free from old ghosts. One evening, while tucking Lucy into bed, Henry found her lost in thought. She looked up with a serious expression. "Daddy," she said, "do you think Grace is happy in heaven?" He felt a tender ache in his chest. "I think so," he replied softly. "She's probably smiling, knowing she's not alone anymore, and that people finally know the truth about what happened." Lucy nodded thoughtfully, then cuddled up with her stuffed cat. Henry pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Sleep well, sweet pea," he murmured, switching off the lamp. For a moment, he lingered in the doorway, cherishing the sight of her safe and at peace. Then, a whisper of memory crossed his mind, Grace's final anguished cry, the hush of the hallway that night in the daycare. He hoped no child would ever endure such suffering again. A vow formed in his heart that if he could prevent such a tragedy anywhere, he would. The night went on in a soothing hush. No chilling lullabies, no footsteps in empty corridors, no cold presence. Just the soft rustling of leaves outside and the gentle hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Henry sat on the couch, the weight of exhaustion and relief mingling until he drifted into a dreamless sleep. In the morning, golden sunlight filled the cottage's living room. Lucy bounded out of her bedroom, hair a tangled mess, a bright smile on her face. "Daddy, can we make pancakes?" she asked. Henry stretched, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He nodded eagerly. "Absolutely," he said, heading to the kitchen. The routine tasks of measuring flour, cracking eggs, whisking batter felt comforting and solid, a testament to normal life returned. As they ate their pancakes, Lucy giggled at a silly face Henry made with syrup. He joined in the laughter, warmth spreading through him like sunshine. Outside, the cedars swayed gently, and somewhere in the distance, a bird chirped a cheerful tune. No traces of gloom lingered. Cedar Glen had its share of shadows, but Henry and Lucy had helped banish at least one that festered far too long. In those final, precious moments, Henry realized they had reached the other side of their tribulations. The secrets had been unveiled, the haunted child set free, and Lucy was safe. He felt lighter than he had in years, even lighter than before Eleanor had passed. There would always be sorrow for what was lost, but now there was also gratitude for what they'd saved, and for the second chance at happiness they'd earned together. Thank you so much for sharing in this journey with us. If you believe that every lost truth deserves a chance to shine, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories just like this one. We appreciate you watching, and we'll see you next time.